In the midst of an America left in ruins, the sun rose over a desolate world. Once vibrant cities were now silent, their skyscrapers crumbling and empty. What had begun as a series of bizarre reports of strange illness soon spiraled into a global catastrophe. Humans transformed into mindless, ravenous zombies. On the outskirts of what used to be Chicago, a group of survivors gathered in an old abandoned factory. These people, survivors of the plague that had consumed the country, were the last remnants of humanity. Among them was Jack Reynolds, a former soldier, his face weathered with the pain of loss and the fire of resolve. Jack had been the leader of this ragtag band since the day the virus had started spreading. He had seen it all, the destruction, the horrors, the despair, but now he had only one focus: survival. His group consisted of a diverse set of individuals. Sarah, a brilliant medic who had lost her family to the outbreak. David, a skilled mechanic with an unshakable sense of humor. Lena, a former schoolteacher who had transformed into a quick-thinking strategist. And Chris, a young and eager recruit who had only recently joined the group. They were huddled in the shadows of the factory, waiting for dusk. The sun's dying light painted the sky orange and red as they carefully prepared their weapons. The factory, once a place of industry and innovation, now served as their home, a sanctuary in the war-torn wilderness. "Everyone ready?" Jack asked, his voice rough from days of shouting orders and fighting the undead. David nodded, testing the mechanism on his makeshift crossbow. "Ready as I'll ever be. We've got enough ammo, right?" "More than enough. We'll need every bullet we can find," Jack replied, his eyes scanning the horizon outside the cracked windows. A loud growl echoed from the streets. Zombies. It was getting closer, and they were getting desperate. The group had been tracking a supply convoy for days, food, medicine, and weapons. But the convoy had been ambushed by a pack of the undead. "We can't keep running forever," Lena said, her voice low but resolute. "If we want to survive, we need to fight back. We need to take back the cities." Jack clenched his jaw. The idea of fighting back was terrifying, but Lena was right. If they didn't act soon, the zombies would have the whole country. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking back what was lost. As night fell, the factory grew eerily quiet, save for the distant sounds of groaning zombies. A map was spread across a rusty old table, illuminated by a single lantern. "We've got a plan," Jack said, his finger tracing a route on the map. "There's a government facility in the heart of the city, Fort Harrison. If we get there, we might be able to find supplies or even some military personnel who can help us regroup." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's risky. The city's overrun and the military's been gone for months." "It's the only chance we've got," Jack insisted. "We either take the risk or we sit here and wait to die." The group shared uncertain glances, the weight of their decision sinking in. They knew the odds were slim, but without action, they would eventually become just another casualty of the apocalypse. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. The groans of zombies grew louder. It was only a matter of time before they found their safe haven. "Time to go," Jack ordered. "We move out in 5 minutes. Weapons ready, stay close, and keep quiet." The survivors gathered their gear, each person lost in their own thoughts. As they moved toward the exit, the factory's large steel door groaned open with a screech. The night air was cold, but the tension in the air was colder. They stepped outside into the night, the glow of the dying sun disappearing behind the silhouette of the crumbling city skyline. The smell of decay was overpowering, and a shiver ran down their spines. This wasn't the world they had once known. This was a new reality. A reality where the living had to fight tooth and nail to survive against an enemy that never slept and never showed mercy. Chris, the youngest of the group, glanced nervously around. "Are we really doing this?" he whispered, almost to himself. Lena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We have to. It's the only way forward." Jack led the way, keeping his rifle at the ready. The group moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows, avoiding any unnecessary noise. Each corner turned, each alley they passed, brought the looming threat of zombies lurking in the dark. But they weren't just fighting the dead. As they approached the city's edge, they could see the remnants of what had once been a thriving civilization, now a war zone. And deep in the shadows, they knew there was something even more dangerous than the undead, desperate, ruthless humans who had turned to banditry for survival. In this new world, trust was a luxury, and betrayal could come from anyone. They were about to enter the heart of the danger zone, where both the living and the dead fought to dominate what was left of America. The real battle was just beginning. The shadows of the city loomed larger as Jack and his group crept through the streets, their senses heightened with every step. The once thriving urban landscape had turned into a nightmarish wasteland. Cracked pavement, abandoned cars, and the smell of death in the air. Every corner of the city felt like it could be their last. "Stay sharp," Jack murmured, his voice low, barely above a whisper. He gestured for them to stop. In the distance, the unmistakable shuffle of zombies echoed, reverberating through the empty streets. They were close, too close for comfort. Lena crouched behind a dumpster, scanning the area with quick, practiced movements. "It's too quiet. No movement in the buildings." "But we know the zombies don't like the open streets. They stick to the alleyways," she said, adjusting the map in her hand. "We're heading toward the heart of the city, but we need to be cautious." "We're not alone out here," Jack replied, scanning the dimly lit horizon. It was only a matter of time before they ran into trouble. The air was heavy with a faint scent of rotting flesh, and every so often, a distant scream would echo from somewhere deep in the city. The survivors didn't know if it was another group of humans or just the unsettling noise of the undead. But one thing was certain: they were not alone. The group continued to move forward, sticking to narrow alleyways, their eyes darting around for any signs of danger. Sarah kept her medical kit close, her fingers brushing over the supplies, checking for anything that could be useful in case of an emergency. "How much further?" Chris asked, his voice laced with nervousness. "We're close," Jack said, his face grim. "We just need to make it to Fort Harrison. It's a military base. If we're lucky, there'll be survivors there, maybe some supplies." They pressed on, the city stretching endlessly before them. Every street corner seemed like a trap, a potential danger waiting to spring. There were moments of eerie stillness, followed by the unsettling sound of shuffling feet, the low growls of zombies moving through the darkness. Just as they rounded a corner, they heard a loud crash from behind them. Startled, the group spun around, weapons raised. The source of the noise became apparent as a group of zombies stumbled out from a nearby building, their bloodshot eyes locked onto the group. "Run!" Jack shouted, his voice slicing through the air. The group bolted, their footsteps pounding the pavement as the zombies chased them. Adrenaline surged through their bodies as they sprinted down the street. The undead were slow, but relentless. Their guttural moans echoed louder with every step, and Jack could feel his heart racing. They had to make it to Fort Harrison. There was no other option. "Up ahead," Lena called out, pointing toward a narrow stairwell leading up to the roof of a crumbling building. Without hesitation, Jack took the lead, pushing forward as the rest of the group followed. One by one, they scrambled up the stairs, Chris bringing up the rear. As he reached the top, he stumbled, almost losing his balance. A quick look over his shoulder confirmed their worst fears. The zombies were gaining on them. "Go, go, go!" David shouted, pulling Chris to his feet. The group reached the roof, panting, but they were not safe yet. The city stretched out before them, a vast expanse of crumbling buildings and forgotten streets. The base was somewhere out there, but it felt so far. "We can't just sit here. The zombies will surround this building," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. She scanned the rooftops ahead. "We need a way to move forward without being seen." "Think," Jack said, wiping sweat from his brow. "There has to be a way." Lena pointed across the gap between two buildings. "There. We can make it across to that other roof. It's a risk, but it's our best shot." The group nodded in agreement. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Jump across the gap, get to the next rooftop, and continue moving. "David, you're first," Jack ordered, as the mechanic sized up the gap between the buildings. "Don't say that like it's easy," David muttered, but he was already backing up, getting a running start. With a grunt, David launched himself across the gap, his body propelled forward by sheer determination. He barely made it, his fingertips scraping the edge of the building before he pulled himself up. "Your turn," David called, catching his breath. One by one, the survivors made the leap, adrenaline giving them the push they needed. Each jump was more perilous than the last, but they managed to make it across. Chris was the last to leap, his hands shaking as he stared at the gap. For a moment, it seemed like he might back out. But then, with a deep breath, he sprinted forward and jumped. His body soared through the air, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to slow. His hands reached for the edge of the roof. "Got it," Chris shouted in relief, his fingers closing around the edge just in time. The group collapsed onto the new roof, hearts pounding, breathing heavy. The zombies below were still shuffling around, but they hadn't seen them. For now, they were safe. "That was too close," Lena breathed, wiping her brow. Jack nodded grimly. "We keep moving. We're not out of danger yet." The sun had dipped behind the skyline, and the true depth of the city's chaos was revealed. The once proud landmarks now lay in ruins, consumed by the forces of both the dead and the living. They were getting closer to Fort Harrison, but each step forward was becoming more perilous. Behind them, the distant sounds of the zombies' moans faded, but the reality of what lay ahead pressed in on them, tightening with every step. The war for the survival of humanity had truly begun, and the hardest battles, both with the dead and the living, were yet to come. The survivors moved across the rooftops with quiet determination, their eyes scanning every shadow, every alley below them. The sense of danger lingered in the air, thick and palpable, as they made their way toward Fort Harrison. Jack kept his hand firmly on the rifle slung across his back, his instincts always alert. The others followed close behind, keeping their pace steady but cautious. There was something about the city at night, something that felt wrong. The streets were eerily silent, as if the whole place was holding its breath. "This place is too quiet," David murmured, looking down at the street below. "I don't trust it." "I agree," Lena added, scanning the surroundings. "It's almost like we're being watched." The words hung in the air like a warning. "We keep moving," Jack ordered, his voice low but firm. "We're almost there." They continued, making their way across a series of rooftops, carefully jumping from one to the next, avoiding any unnecessary noise. Each of them had mastered the art of rooftop travel over the last few months, but even so, every leap carried with it the risk of falling, of death. As they crossed another narrow alley, the sound of a distant scream pierced the night air. The high-pitched wail sent chills down their spines. "That was too close," Chris said, voice trembling. "What if it's another group of survivors? Or worse, a trap?" "We can't afford to wait," Jack replied, his tone decisive. "If it's a trap, we deal with it. We can't be stopped now." As they moved on, the group encountered a building that was partially collapsed, its windows broken, and its door hanging off its hinges. The building seemed abandoned, but a few things caught their attention. A flickering light inside, the faint sound of footsteps. "They're inside," Sarah whispered, her medical kit clenched in her hands. "Should we go around?" Jack didn't answer right away. He was staring at the building, his sharp mind calculating their next move. "No," he finally said. "We move in carefully, check it out. It could be another group of survivors. If they're not hostile, they might have information or better supplies." The group nodded, preparing themselves for whatever might be inside. They crept up to the entrance, their senses on high alert, every creak of the building's frame sending a ripple of tension through them. David led the way, cautiously stepping over rubble as he approached the door. He pushed it open slowly, his breath held in anticipation. The door creaked loudly as it swung open, revealing a dark hallway inside. The only light came from a flickering lantern, casting strange, shifting shadows along the walls. "Hello," Jack called softly, his voice echoing through the silence. No answer. They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps muffled on the dusty floor. The faint sounds of footsteps they had heard earlier had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. "Stay sharp," Lena whispered, her hand resting on the hilt of a small knife. They reached the end of the hall, where the flickering light came from a small room. The door was ajar, and they could hear the low murmur of voices inside. Jack motioned for them to halt and took a few steps closer, peering inside the room. What he saw made his blood run cold. There were 4 people inside, 3 men and 1 woman. At first glance, they appeared to be survivors. They were gathered around a makeshift campfire, eating what looked like canned food. But the tension in the room was undeniable. One of the men, a scruffy figure with a dirty beard, was holding a rifle close to his chest, his eyes darting nervously to the door. "We should have kept moving," Sarah whispered, the unease creeping into her voice. Jack nodded. "We don't know if they're friendly yet." Lena stepped forward, her voice steady but cautious. "We're just passing through. We're looking for Fort Harrison." The woman in the room stiffened at the mention of the military base. "Fort Harrison?" she repeated, her voice tinged with suspicion. "You're heading toward that hellhole?" "We have to," Jack replied. "It's the only chance we've got for survival." The man with the rifle lowered his weapon slightly, eyeing Jack and the group. His gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment, then shifted back to Jack. "You're either brave or stupid," he muttered. "Fort Harrison's been a lost cause for months. Zombies are swarming the place, and the military's long gone. You're wasting your time." Jack felt his heart sink. They had known the risk, but hearing it from someone else made it feel more real. "We can't turn back," Lena said, her voice firm. "We've come this far." The woman stood up from her spot by the fire and crossed the room. "I wouldn't say wasting your time, but I'd say if you go in there, be ready for a fight. There's more than just zombies in that place. The real danger is the people who've taken over." Jack's eyes narrowed. "People? What do you mean?" The woman looked around at her companions before lowering her voice. "There are groups in the area, ones that have turned the base into a fortress. But they don't let anyone in. They'll kill you on sight if they think you're a threat. It's a war zone." Jack exchanged looks with the group. Every part of him screamed that they needed to keep going. But now the stakes were higher. Not only would they have to survive the zombie hordes, they'd have to survive other humans, too. "You have to be careful," the woman continued. "You need to move fast and keep your guard up. Trust no one." The group nodded, their nerves fraying with the weight of what lay ahead. They hadn't just been fighting the undead, they were now up against human enemies as well. The fight for survival had taken on a new, more treacherous form. Jack turned back to the group, determination hardening in his eyes. "We're going to Fort Harrison, but we're not walking in blind." The war for the future of America had just taken an even darker turn. They had come to reclaim their world. But first, they'd have to survive the people who had already claimed it. The air grew colder as the survivors made their way out of the dilapidated building, the warning of the woman echoing in their minds. Fort Harrison was no longer just a destination. It was a battlefront. And with every step they took, the weight of the unknown pressed heavier on their shoulders. "We need to be smart about this," Jack said, his voice low and grave. "We know the zombies are the least of our problems now. People who've turned the base into their stronghold. That's what we're up against." Lena looked up at the crumbling skyline, her brow furrowed. "We can't let fear slow us down. If we don't get there, we die out here. We need to move faster." Chris, who had been quiet for most of the journey, spoke up. "What if they're right? What if Fort Harrison is a lost cause?" Jack turned to him, his expression hardening. "It's not a question of what might happen, Chris. It's the only chance we have. If we don't try, we're just waiting for the zombies to catch us. We keep moving." The group nodded grimly, agreeing that they had no choice but to continue toward the base. As they moved through the ruins of the city, they found themselves crossing more broken streets and abandoned cars. The silence of the night was haunting, the only sounds being the wind, the distant growls of zombies, and the occasional clink of their own gear. Every step felt like they were walking on the edge of a knife. Hours passed, and fatigue began to weigh heavily on them. They hadn't encountered any zombies in the immediate area, but the fact that the streets were so quiet made Jack uneasy. They reached a narrow alleyway when they heard it, the unmistakable crackling of radio static. Someone was out there. "Everyone stay down," Jack hissed, motioning for them to duck behind an overturned truck. They huddled together, their breath held in the oppressive silence. Through the gap in the truck's frame, they saw a figure emerge from the shadows, a man carrying a rifle. He looked like a survivor, but there was something about the way he moved, something that didn't sit right with Jack. The man stopped in the alley, his eyes darting around as though he was searching for something or someone. Jack's heart pounded as he assessed the situation. The man was alone, but Jack wasn't willing to take any chances. "Stay quiet," he whispered to the group. "If he's hostile, we need to act fast." The stranger turned toward the truck, his gaze falling on their hiding spot. For a long moment, everything seemed frozen in time. Then, with a sudden movement, the man raised his rifle. Jack's instincts kicked in. "Now," he yelled. And in an instant, he was out from behind the truck, his rifle raised. Sarah followed close behind, pulling her handgun from its holster. The man's eyes widened in surprise as he fumbled with his weapon, but he didn't fire. "Wait, wait," he shouted, his hands raised in surrender. "I'm not one of them. I'm not a bandit. You're a survivor?" Jack interrupted, his voice steady, though his finger hovered over the trigger. The man nodded quickly, his face a mix of fear and desperation. "I'm just trying to get to Fort Harrison. I heard rumors. There's a group there. They have food, weapons, everything. But you don't want to go there now. Not with them running the place." "Who's them?" Lena asked, her eyes narrowing. The man swallowed hard, his voice low. "A group of ex-soldiers. They've turned Fort Harrison into their base. They kill anyone who tries to get inside. The rumors, they say they're worse than the zombies." Jack exchanged a look with his group. This was the second warning they had received, but the need for supplies was overwhelming. The man was alone, and as much as Jack hated to admit it, they didn't have many options. "Why are you out here?" Jack asked, keeping his weapon trained on the man, though his tone was softer. The man's eyes flickered with a mix of embarrassment and guilt. I tried to get inside the base. I thought I could make a deal, but I was caught. They locked me out. I've been running ever since." David glanced at Jack. "We can't just leave him out here. If he's telling the truth, he knows more about Fort Harrison than we do." Jack hesitated. There was something off about this man, something didn't add up. But the desperate look in his eyes made Jack question if they could afford to turn him away. "You come with us," Jack finally said. "But if you're lying, if you lead us into a trap, you won't survive long enough to regret it." The man nodded quickly. "I swear I'm telling the truth. You won't regret it." The survivors exchanged wary looks, but agreed to let him join them. They couldn't afford to be choosy. The group moved out again, with the man now walking alongside them, though Jack kept a close eye on him. Every word, every action was scrutinized. As they continued through the darkened city, they encountered no zombies, but the tension was suffocating. Each footstep felt heavier, as if the weight of their choices was dragging them down. The man, whose name turned out to be Ethan, led them toward a large building that looked like a former government office. "Fort Harrison is just beyond this," he said, pointing to a set of rusted gates in the distance. "But I'm telling you, watch your backs. There's a group inside. They don't like outsiders." But as they neared the gates, something unexpected happened. A sudden, sharp pain shot through Jack's side. He gasped, stumbling forward, clutching at his wound. Blood soaked his shirt, his vision blurring. The man who had been their supposed guide, Ethan, stood behind him, his rifle aimed directly at Jack's back. "You made a mistake trusting me," Ethan sneered, his voice cold and calculating. A sudden, sickening realization hit Jack. The group hadn't just been led into a trap, they had been betrayed. As the world around him started to fade, Jack's last thought was, they were never the real enemy. The taste of betrayal was bitter in Jack's mouth as he collapsed against the cold concrete, blood seeping through his fingers. His hand pressed tight against the wound in his side. The shock of the gunshot had sent him reeling, but the searing pain brought him back to focus. Ethan stood over him now, rifle raised, his expression one of cruel satisfaction. The man they had trusted, the man they had taken in as one of their own, had betrayed them in the worst way. He'd led them straight into a trap, and now Jack was paying the price. "Why? Jack grunted, struggling to keep his voice steady. His breath was labored, but the anger in him burned hotter than the pain. Why do this? Ethan's lips twisted into a cold, mocking smile. You really think you can just waltz into Fort Harrison? It's a fortress now. You're all just pawns in this mess. I gave you a chance. Now you're gonna die for it. A violent cough racked Jack's body, but he managed to keep his gaze locked on the traitor. His team, his friends, he had to protect them. They were just outside, and they had no idea what Ethan had done. Ethan leaned in closer, his rifle pressing against Jack's chest. You don't know who you're up against. The soldiers in there? They've turned that place into their own kingdom. They'll slit your throat without a second thought. Through the fog of pain, Jack managed to spit out, "You'll never get away with this." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm not planning on getting away with anything. I'm just here to make sure you don't make it." A movement in the shadows caught Jack's attention. Through the corner of his eye, he saw Sarah and Lena creeping forward, weapons drawn, faces set with grim determination. They weren't going to let Jack die here, not like this. In that split second of distraction, Jack took a deep breath, and with a surge of adrenaline, he lunged to the side, just narrowly avoiding Ethan's next strike. The force of the movement shot pain through his side, but he bit down on the agony. "Get down," Jack shouted, voice raw. A shot rang out, bang, and Ethan staggered back, a bullet wound opening up in his shoulder. His rifle clattered to the ground, and he howled in pain, falling to one knee. Lena stepped into the light, rifle aimed at Ethan. "You made a mistake," she said coldly, her eyes steely and unyielding. "No one gets away with betraying us." Ethan's face contorted in fury as he reached for the pistol at his side, but before he could draw it, Lena fired again. The bullet caught him in the chest, and he fell backward, his body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. "Don't make it worse," Lena muttered, her hand still steady as she lowered her weapon. She didn't need to say anything else. The job was done. Jack let out a strained breath, his head spinning. "We have to keep moving," he grunted, struggling to push himself up. "Fort Harrison, we can't stop now." David and Sarah rushed to Jack's side. David carefully pulled him up, supporting most of his weight, while Sarah checked his wound. "We can't just walk in through the front gates, Jack," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "There's no telling how many people are in there or how heavily guarded it is." Jack's breath was shallow, but his mind was clear. "We don't have a choice." Ethan was right about one thing. The base is our last shot. If we don't take it, we're all dead. Lena was already scanning the map in her hands. "There's another way in," she said after a moment, her voice filled with urgency. "There's an old set of tunnels beneath the base, used for logistics during the war. They might still be intact. If we can get in through those, we might avoid the main defenses." "Lead the way," Jack rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We don't have much time." The group hurried through the wreckage of the city, adrenaline pushing them forward despite the weight of their situation. Jack's wound throbbed with every step, but he pushed through the pain. He couldn't afford to slow them down, not now. The city around them seemed even quieter now, the shadows deepening as they moved through the crumbling streets. The sense of impending danger loomed over them, heavy and suffocating. Every turn, every crevice felt like it could hide another threat. As they neared the entrance to the tunnel system, they found it hidden beneath an old, rusted door, half buried under debris. Lena pried it open with a crowbar, and the group descended into the dark, narrow passage beneath the base. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay clung to the walls. The tunnel was tight, the walls slick with moisture, and it felt like the weight of the world pressed down on them with every step. There was no turning back now. "This way," Lena whispered, leading the group down the winding tunnel. The only sound was the soft shuffle of their feet against the ground and the occasional drip of water from a ceiling. Jack's vision was fading in and out, but he refused to let himself collapse. His mind was focused on one thing: survival. If they didn't make it through these tunnels, there was no hope for anyone. Hours passed as they wound through the maze of tunnels, the dark corridors stretching on forever. The claustrophobia started to set in, but Jack held it together. He had to, for his team. Eventually, they reached a large iron door, an old security gate leading into what looked like a storage facility. Through the thick bars, Jack could see the outlines of old equipment and supplies. But beyond that, there was something far more ominous. "Fort Harrison," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "We're almost there." But as they approached the door, the faintest sound caught Jack's ears, a low grinding noise, like machinery coming to life. A voice echoed through the tunnel, sharp and cold. "You should have stayed out of this, survivor." The voice wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. The ex-soldiers of Fort Harrison had found them, and they were ready for a fight. The chilling voice echoed through the darkness of the tunnel, the words biting through the stillness like a knife. For a moment, the survivors froze, the weight of the situation settling in. They had been found. The soldiers of Fort Harrison were no longer just a rumor, they were real, and they had been waiting for them. "Get ready," Jack rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. His side ached with every breath, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him standing. There was no room for hesitation now. The grinding sound grew louder, the unmistakable hiss of old mechanisms coming to life. Through the narrow gap of the iron door, Jack could see dim lights flicker on, casting long shadows across the room beyond. The soldiers had activated the base's security systems, and that meant one thing: they were not going to let anyone in without a fight. "They're close," Lena muttered, her voice tense as she kept her rifle steady. "We have to move fast. Once that door opens, they'll flood this place." David moved up next to Jack, his face grim. "Do you think this is it? Do we stand a chance against them?" Jack's gaze hardened as he looked toward the metal door, his hand clenched tightly around the grip of his rifle. "We don't have a choice. We're in this to the end, whether we're ready or not." The tension in the air was suffocating as they waited in the darkness, every breath heavy with the knowledge that the confrontation was imminent. The sound of footsteps grew louder, sharp echoes bouncing off the tunnel walls. "Get into position," Jack ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing in his mind. "Lena, take the lead. Sarah, you and David hold the back. Chris, stay close." Lena nodded, her eyes sharp as she scanned the tunnel ahead. "We need to take them by surprise. If they don't know what's coming, we might have a shot." Just as she finished speaking, the iron door creaked open, revealing a narrow corridor leading into the heart of Fort Harrison. Beyond it, Jack could see the faint silhouettes of soldiers moving in the shadows. The base's interior was a twisted mix of abandoned military structures and makeshift fortifications. The ex-soldiers had turned this place into their kingdom, and they would defend it with their lives. Without warning, the first soldier appeared at the threshold, a man clad in tattered military gear, his rifle aimed directly at them. His eyes were cold, devoid of mercy. "Not another step," the soldier growled, his voice low and menacing. "You should have turned back when you had the chance." The group didn't hesitate. Lena fired first, the sharp crack of her rifle splitting the air. The bullet hit the soldier in the chest, and he dropped like a rag doll to the ground. "Move," Jack shouted, his voice urgent. The group surged forward, charging into the heart of Fort Harrison's defenses. The ex-soldiers, alerted by the gunshot, began to flood the hallways, weapons drawn. More men and women appeared from the shadows, armed and ready to fight to the death. Gunfire erupted as both sides collided, the sound deafening in the confined space. Jack's vision blurred from the pain in his side, but he pushed through it, focusing on the task at hand. He fired, each shot calculated and precise. The soldiers were tough, but they were no match for the desperation and determination that fueled the survivors. "Keep moving," David yelled as he fired into the crowd, his face a mask of resolve. "We need to get to the control room. Shut down the security, or we'll be trapped in here." Lena, ever the strategist, nodded. "The control room's at the far end of the complex. If we can reach it, we can turn off the defense systems and take control." The group fought their way through the narrow halls, ducking behind cover as more soldiers poured into the room. Each encounter was a deadly dance, a tug-of-war for survival. They were outnumbered, but they were faster, smarter, and more determined. The ex-soldiers had become complacent, too used to their fortified position. The survivors knew that they had one chance to break through, and they weren't about to let it slip away. As they neared the control room, Jack's mind raced. He could hear the sounds of his team fighting behind him, the gunshots ringing out as they cleared their path. He knew that the moment they entered that room, everything would change. They would either win or die trying. Almost there. Jack gritted out, his breath ragged. "We have to make it count. When we get in, Lena, you take the system. The rest of us will cover you." Lena nodded sharply, her face set in a fierce determination. "Understood. Just keep them off me long enough to do this." They reached the control room door, and Jack threw it open with a kick, rushing in with the rest of the team hot on his heels. Inside, the control room was a maze of flashing lights and old machinery. A group of soldiers stood at the far end, their backs to the team as they manned the console. Lena didn't waste a second. She bolted toward the terminal, fingers flying across the buttons, while the rest of the team fanned out, taking cover and firing at the soldiers. The chaos was overwhelming, but Lena's focus never wavered as she typed in commands, trying to bypass the security system. Come on," she muttered under her breath, sweat dripping from her brow as she worked. The soldiers reacted quickly, but not quickly enough. They had underestimated the survivors, and now they were paying the price. One by one, the ex-soldiers were taken down, their attempts to retaliate thwarted by the skilled fire of Jack and his team. Finally, with a triumphant beep, the system powered down. The lights flickered once, then went dark, and the oppressive hum of the security system ceased. "We're in," Lena announced, a grin of victory flashing across her face. "Now let's finish this." But just as they thought they had won, a new figure appeared in the doorway, a man taller than the rest, his uniform decorated with the insignia of the base's commander. He was older, hardened by battle, with a scar running down the side of his face. "You think you've won," the man said, his voice filled with venom. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your lives. You don't know what you're dealing with." Jack's heart raced. This was the final boss, the one they had been preparing for, without even knowing it. But Jack didn't flinch. He raised his rifle, eyes locked on the commander. "No, you don't understand. You've already lost." With one final charge, the battle for Fort Harrison began, and this time, the survivors had more than just hope on their side.